Baghdad to see Saddam Hussein.
President Bush tries to break the deadlock in the Persian Gulf.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. For the first time since Iraq invaded Kuwait on the 2nd of August, President Bush has talked about talking to Saddam Hussein. And in many countries tonight, for the first time in many weeks, there is hope, if not real conviction, that here is a chance to resolve the crisis in the Persian Gulf without combat. But the president said talk, not negotiate. Mr. Bush has invited the Iraqi Foreign Minister to Washington during the week of December the 10th to talk. And the Secretary of State, Jim Baker, will be available to go to Baghdad between the 15th of December and the 10th of January to talk. Iraq, the president said, must still withdraw from Kuwait, no ifs, ands, or buts. Our first report is from the White House, and here's ABC's Britt Hume.
The president insisted the invitation to the Iraqi Foreign Minister and the Baker mission to Baghdad do not mean he is now prepared to negotiate or make concessions to get Iraq out of Kuwait. Indeed, he indicated Baker would be telling Saddam Hussein just the opposite.
He got to understand what the alternatives are to complying with the United Nations resolution. And the best way to get that across is one-on-one. Baker looking him right in the eye. I've been told that he doesn't necessarily believe that I am totally committed to what I've been saying. And here's a good opportunity to have him understand that face to face.
The president held out no great hope, however, that these meetings would lead to a peaceful outcome. And while he said he doesn't regard January 15th as an absolute deadline for military action, he spoke resolutely about what kind of conflict it would be if it came.
This will not be another Vietnam. This will not be a protracted, drawn-out war. We will not permit our troops to have their hands tied behind their backs, and I pledge to you there will not be any murky ending.
That stern statement was coupled with a highly emotional response to a question about whether this cause is worth the deaths of American soldiers.
You ought to read my mail. It is so heart-moving, supportive, and yet please bring my kid home. Please bring my husband home. And it's a tough question, but a president has to make the right decision. And these are worldwide principles of moral importance.
The president may mean it when he says there'll be no effort in the talks with Iraq to give Saddam Hussein a face-saving way out. But Mr. Bush must know that if Saddam doesn't budge, he will have no face-saving way out either. And that may be why the prospect of war and American casualties seems so real to him. Britt Hume, ABC News, the White House.
The UN resolution on force set the January 15th deadline to allow, in its words, one final opportunity for diplomacy to work. And it seems clear today that many of the nations which voted for the resolution yesterday, envisioned the sort of mission that President Bush outlined today for Secretary of State Baker. Here's our national security correspondent, John McWethy.
Some of the foreign ministers Secretary Baker met with before yesterday's vote on the UN resolution suggested that the U.S. might want to send a high-ranking emissary to Baghdad. But even last night, as Baker met with many of them in New York, he never tipped his hand. U.S. officials say the final decision was not made until this morning at the White House. Though generally applauded, the strategy still has risks. One is that the opening will be misinterpreted by Saddam Hussein.
By sending Baker, who is our top negotiator, it does sort of suggest an invitation to negotiate.
The administration says that is something it will not do. Talk, yes. Long and protracted negotiations, no. It also could heighten the expectation in the U.S. that a political settlement can be reached. If Baker comes back empty-handed, the Bush administration will still be faced with options that appear to lead in only one direction, toward war. But the positive factors far outweigh the risks, analysts say.
I think it's going to cut off a lot of the debate that was beginning to take place in Congress in public opinion, and it's a masterstroke in terms of domestic politics.
It may also help to unify the coalition against Iraq if fighting breaks out, because the U.S. can argue with some justification that it tried everything before going to war. But the biggest potential advantage is that it just might work, setting into motion a chain of events that could allow Saddam Hussein a face-saving way to back down. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
The president's offer today may indeed have blunted the criticism from some of his domestic political critics. Certainly it seems to have eased the pressure he's been feeling from some of the congressional leaders who met with him this afternoon at the White House. Here's ABC's Jim Wooten.
After their meeting with the president today, the congressional leadership emerged to say his new diplomatic initiative was probably just what the doctor ordered.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's a graphic example of his willingness to go the last mile.
And Congressman Hyde's fellow Republican, Senator Lugar, urged an immediate special session of Congress that would endorse the president's approach.
But in order to be credible with Saddam Hussein, Jim Baker needs to have behind him a united country.
Both he and Senate Republican leader Dole want Congress reconvened to reinforce the president's position. The Democratic leadership, Senator Mitchell and Speaker Foley, opposed that, preferring to wait until after the first of the year for Congress to deal with the crisis. Democratic Senator Nunn, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, took a familiar Washington perspective.
If all of this works out and Iraq gets out of Kuwait and we don't have a war, then everything is going to look like it was brilliant. And I will be the first to say it was wonderful and everything was fine.
Very few members of Congress are still in Washington, but from those who are, there came a collective sigh of relief today. There will not be a special session of Congress. They will not have to vote yea or nay on war. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
In a moment, Baghdad considers its options. And at the end of the broadcast tonight, our Person of the Week.